Okay, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bill Phillis. He's here on my right. He's got his own little name tag here. And he drove down from Columbus today to be with us. I just want you to know, he made this drive for us. I'm really impressed. So, wait a second, we've got to get your microphone on. Do we have a microphone? Oh, he does. No, you are good. So we'll have to make sure that it's the volume is up. So I'm going to go to the back and check, make sure that we can hear you. So without further ado, Bill Phillis from Columbus.
I don't know why that's such a big deal about me driving from Columbus. I just got back from Louisville on Sunday. What's that? Huh?
No. Try it again.
It's on.
You can turn the volume up over there.
The light's on.
Turn it up, Alberta.
Okay. How is it now? Or I can just shut this off and think I'm in a classroom like I used to be. I don't know what the big deal is about me driving down to Columbus. That's just a short drive, but I appreciate your sentiments with regard to that. I was asked to introduce kind of myself, but first I want to mention that Sue, who invited me, was concerned about whether we would have a big crowd here or a short crowd or whatever. That reminded me.
Microphone, please. Microphone. Right into it.
Okay, well.
Right into it.
There it is.
Well, this is the time's almost up for that. Do I need this now?
Yes, please.
I need this. Okay.
Talk right into it.
Okay. We're getting off to a rough start here. But anyway, Sue was concerned about, would we have a crowd? And that doesn't bother me. I remember last winter when it was snowing, with about 2 feet of snow on the ground, I went to Lawrence County for a meeting. Now, Lawrence County is, down in the hills, down along the river. And I went through, it took me about 4 hours to get from Columbus to where I was going in Lawrence County. When I got there, there was only one person in this huge auditorium. And I thought, well, I've driven 4 hours. He's going to get the whole ball of wax. He's going to get the whole speech. And so I even gestured. I was really animated. And when I finished, he gave me a standing ovation. And I was excited about it. I went back, way back in the corner where he was, and I said, what community are you from here? Oh no, I'm not from here. I'm from Purdue University. My name is Professor Caldwell, and I'm the next person on the program. Let's sit here. So I've traveled the state of Ohio many times over, and so small crowds, large crowds, that's fine. Whatever. I want to. I'm going to tell you what Sue told me to tell you, and so if you don't like it, check with her. If you like it, of course, you can let me know about it. What I want to do, first of all, let me tell you that I started teaching in 1958 in Ross County, Ohio. The school building that I started in is no longer there. But I spent some time there in the classroom, and then was hired as the high school principal, and then took a superintendency in Scioto County, and then went to Columbiana County as a county superintendent and started the joint vocational school district there, that Great Oaks kind of thing that's in this area, in your Cincinnati career programs, career technical programs. And then was asked by the Superintendent of Public Instruction to come to Columbus to serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state, and I spent 16 years there. I decided that really couldn't make much impact on school funding and a lot of other things, being in the state office as assistant superintendent of public instruction. So there was this group in southeastern Ohio in the Appalachian region that decided to sue the state. And that kind of appealed to me, and they kind of wanted me to come with them. So I left the State Department of Education on April 13, 1992, and April 14, 1992. The next day, I moved my belongings to the Bricker Neckler Law Firm, where they had an office for me. The Bricker Neckler Law Firm represented the coalition of school districts that were suing the state. And so since 1992, I've been with the Coalition for Equity and Adequacy of School Funding, and have a little bit to show for that. Our coalition has at least over 1,200 school districts, or 1,200 school buildings out there across the state that are there because of the litigation effort. Now, we made a little progress in terms of the percentage of the state general revenue budget going to public education, public K-12 education. When we started this effort, 34.5% of the state general revenue budget went to education, K-12 education, and that moved up to 43%, and it's still lingering around 40%. So in terms of a state priority, we made some progress there in terms of school funding. However, what the state gave to school districts really was taken away by charter schools and vouchers. And so we are probably no better off today in terms of the school system than we were back when we started this effort, because of all this money that's been siphoned off by charters and vouchers. Now, I'll come back to that point, but in order to really get a good view of this whole matter, we need to start with what the Constitution says about public education. And so I want to demonstrate, if I have time here, to identify the fact that charters and vouchers detract, hinder, take away from the state's responsibility to secure a thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state. Now, the Constitution is very clear. It says in Article 6, Section 2, that the General Assembly shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state. Thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state. That language has meaning. The Constitutional Convention of 1850-1851 was held in Columbus, and then the next year was held in Cincinnati. But when they finished their work, they put this provision that the General Assembly shall secure a thorough and efficient system of common schools throughout the state. Now, some definitions I think are important. One is this whole idea of thorough. The 1828 dictionary, Webster's Dictionary, that was used at the time of the Constitutional Convention, defines thorough as perfect. It defines thorough as complete in every detail. In fact, one of the delegates to that Constitutional Convention said that he wanted to see a system, when they were debating this whole idea of thorough and efficient, said he wanted to see a system that was as perfect as could be designed. As perfect as could be designed. So that wasn't just just an ordinary system. It was a thorough and efficient system. Thorough, complete, perfect. And then efficient, obviously, a well-working system, one that's effective, and that, according to the dictionary definition of 1828 Webster's, an effective system. Those words mean the same today. Now, this idea of common school. common. Not just an ordinary school, but a school that is equally owned by the folks. One that is common. It's a commonwealth. Common to everyone. Everyone has an equal participation, an equal ownership, an equal identity to this school system. That's what common means. And those words were used those words were chosen very well. I've read the debates. They struggle with words to force the legislature to provide an excellent, a high-quality system of education to all the students of all the children of all the people of the state of Ohio. Now, the state's responsibility, and by the way, a thorough and efficient system of common schools is the only function that the Constitution specifically directs the legislature to by taxation fund. Remember that. It's the only function that the Constitution directs the legislature to fund. Now, during the period of time from the Constitutional Convention up until the 1900s, the state commissioners of common schools, they had, instead of superintendent of public instruction, they had a state commissioner of common schools. Those commissioners were always saying that we need to provide an equal opportunity for kids. We need to find, the rural schools at that time were decrepit compared to some of the more affluent areas. The commissioners were always harping to the legislature about we need to get additional resources into those poorer districts. And you know what? Here in 2019, we have the same issue. We have the very same issue. We have the issue of inequality in school opportunities and educational opportunities. That has persisted through the ages. Now, let's fast forward to 1912, and maybe that's not very fast from 1853 to 1912, but the delegates to that convention in 1912, they were unhappy with the condition of schooling. They were very unhappy, and so some of them some of the city people wanted to establish that cities could have a charter for education and leave the state system. Now think about that, a charter to leave the state system. But the people in the convention said, well, essentially we're going to go a different direction. And so they put language in the Constitution that says, provisions shall be made by law for the organization, the administration, and control of the public school system supported by public funds. Now, there was always a tendency on the part of some people in the social order to get the money, some of the money, from the public system and shove it over into the private system. There was always some tendency for some that wanted to leave the state system. Now, fast forward to 1990, and we had this idea of chartering. See that same idea in 1912. Charter, leave the state system, okay, for charters. Leave the state system with vouchers. Now, that idea wasn't new. In fact, back in 1840, in the city of New York, there was a great movement. New York City, there's a great movement to leave the public system, establish a private system at public expense. Now, that didn't happen until the last few decades, maybe the last few years, that idea of public funding for private education. Well, let's go to that idea of provisions shall be made by law for the organization, administration, and control of the public system. We conclude with the first constitutional amendment in 1850-51 and the second one in 1912. We conclude that education is a state function, that the state has equal responsibility for all the children of all the people, has the responsibility for an equitable system, an adequate system, a high-quality system throughout the state. Now, the state has really struggled with that. And the reason I know is that Cincinnati City Board of Education back in 1976 filed suit against the state saying that we don't have a fair and efficient system. Well, what happened there, and it was in 1976 that I went to the State Department of Education as Assistant Superintendent of Public Instruction, and so I have some first-hand, information about that suit. It was kind of a really a dark day for government when the leader of the Senate, and the leader of the House, and the leader of the administration, the governor, and the Supreme Court justice came together. They came together and decided it would not be in their best interest for the court to rule in favor of Cincinnati. Now that's that's a dark day for government when these three branches of government came together and made a joint decision rather than a legal decision, a judicial decision on the matter. Well, then so it was just business as usual, and then come down to 1988. An assistant superintendent of public instruction was in Perry County, Ohio, telling the superintendents, after having worked in the state for years and years, I'm just going to tell you, you have to get together, and if anything good's going to happen for your schools, you're going to have to do it yourself. You're going to have to force the state. You know what? They put together the Coalition for Rural Appalachian Schools, and then they decided they did a lot of things to help curriculum and joint efforts, but then they said we have to have more money. We can't do this on a shoestring. And so they said, let's just sue the state. Now, can you imagine that? Southeastern Ohio school districts that have virtually no political clout, compared to, there was more representation in Cuyahoga County, political representation in Cuyahoga County, than all of Appalachia. But they decided to sue the state. Now they got some other people to come along, including the city of Cincinnati, and the big 8 schools, including a lot of other districts, even some suburban communities. And lo and behold, this suit that nobody thought would ever be ruled in favor of the coalition districts, the court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs. Now that was that really sent the governor and the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate into orbit, because 2 of the members of their party joined 2 Democrats to make a 4-3 decision with regard to the unconstitutionality of the system. Well, let's then. So with that kind of background, this state responsibility, the lawsuit that said that the system was neither fair nor efficient, the lawsuit that said that there are 4 factors that contribute to the unworkability of the system and must be eliminated. 2 of those factors are the operation of the school funding formula, and then the emphasis on property tax in the formula. So 2 things wrong. The formula is wrong, and overemphasis on property tax was wrong. Now you talked about abatement here a while ago, and that's still another issue, a tangent issue. And so the state went to work to fix the system, but ever so slowly. Now, shortly after the court, or during the time that the court ruled against the state, some state officials decided, we want to find a cheaper way of providing education. And so they stumbled on, and this was happening in some other states, stumbled on the charter school idea. Now, the voucher idea had really, started back in the first years of the Boinovich administration. When the governor at that time really bailed out the diocese, and I'm just being blunt, bailed out the diocese of Cleveland in terms of their school system, and started this Cleveland vouchers program. And they said, it was very, very interesting because the Attorney General of the state of Ohio was in federal court, in the U.S. Supreme Court, arguing that our system is better. Well, the Attorney General was arguing in the state system that our system is better than thorough and efficient. Okay? The Attorney General says it's better than the thorough and efficient. It exceeds the standard of thorough and efficient. But in federal court, the same Attorney General was arguing that we had to get these kids out of Cleveland because the system was totally failing. Now, a little bit of a little dichotomy there in terms of message, but that actually was the case. Well, so this whole idea of vouchers and charters started moving forward about the time that the Supreme Court made the decision that the system of school funding is unconstitutional. Now, that's what they said. We just need a few vouchers. We have a $10 or $10 million experiment with charters, and we're just going to see if these things work. Well, without any research, without any evaluation, it went from a $10 million program to a $50 million program the next year without any research, to a $100 million program per year the next year, and then it just escalated from there. And right now, as we stand here, there have been more than $11 billion siphoned off of the public schools of Ohio. $11 billion siphoned off for charters. Now, let me say that charters don't match the constitutional provision for a common school. Charters are not common schools. Charters are privately operated entities.
Exactly.
Charters are a business.
Exactly.
It is not a public enterprise, a public school enterprise. The reason that charter people want to style themselves as public is so they can get the money. But then when you want to find out something about them, they say, well, no, wait a minute, we're private.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not, we're not subject to public records requests and those sort of things. And then, of course, charters are supposed to be non-profit, and they are non-profit at the base level. But then K-12 operates in Ohio. It's a national for-profit company, a publicly traded company, and so it's a profit company. Imagine Schools is a for-profit operator. ECOT, the infamous ECOT, Education or Electronic Classroom of Tomorrow, this outfit was not only public in terms of the management, was public in terms of providing service, or private in terms of management, private in terms of providing services, and hence lots of profit to be made there. Now, just one little bit of trivia here, a little statistic. In 3 years, it was found, just in a 3-year period, ECOT had been operating for like 18 years. But in a 3-year period, ECOT was paid $127 million without having any students to back up their claim. $127 million. Now, other ones were, smaller ones were just as bad. Now remember, this is just a 3-year period. So, there has been a total, in a 3-year period, a total of $167 million collected by online charter schools for which no students were participating. Now that has an economic, that has a finance implication for public schools, but think of the kids that are out there with no education. No education whatsoever. Online chartering in Ohio has effectively repealed the Compulsory Education Act, the compulsory education laws in the state of Ohio. So, we have all of this money being wasted, and it's being wasted in terms of deregulation. Well, you know, we're going to deregulate the system. We're going to get rid of the bureaucracy. We're going to get rid of the overhead. Just these mammoth school districts in favor of little mom and pop things. Well, now let me go to another little statistic here. Back in the early 1900s, we had 3,500 school districts. And why did we consolidate school districts? One thing was for efficiency. What? Better programs, bringing more kids together, better curriculum, just a better program altogether. And so, by 1979, 76, 77, 78, 79, along in there, we'd gone from 3,500 districts down to 600 districts. Okay? No, 617 districts. I don't misspoke. 617 districts. Why'd we go from 3,500 to 617? Better programming? More efficiency? Now, since 1993, the state of Ohio has approved 600 charters. Think of that. 600 charters, little, and in many cases little operations, 600 of them. Guess how many of those have either not opened, they were funded, or have closed? Half of them. 291. Now think of the waste of money. Think of the waste of human capital, the waste of education, kids being disrupted. Half of them have closed. Now, the voucher program, we started out with the Cleveland voucher program. We ended up with, now we have at least 5 programs, and they're wanting more programs. Bills in the legislature as we speak that would expand the vouchers just to most anybody that wanted one. I remember back in November 25, 1991, George Herbert Walker Bush came to Ohio in the old Betts Memorial Auditorium. It's no longer there, they've torn it down. And he said that you people in Ohio need to give a voucher to every kid and let them go to wherever they want to go to school. In other words, usurp the Constitution of the state of Ohio and just pass the money around. And now, I remember Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper article the next day said, Ohio isn't, the Ohioans aren't buying that idea. I have a copy of that newspaper if anybody wants a copy of that article, if anybody wants it. And so the governor at the time appointed a a guy by the name of David Brennan for a Parent Choice Committee. And Brennan ended up being one of the biggest charter school providers in the history of Ohio. And so, you know, we have that going. Now you would think, and what I'm describing here as the failure of the charter operation, what I'm describing is happening all over the United States. But then, why does it continue? Why is Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, why is she going around the country trying to get people to buy into her $5 billion education savings accounts, which is another way of saying vouchers, okay? And why do people put up with this? When vouchers detract from the public school system, charters detract from the public school system, and particularly the charters are corrupt. Now, why do we put up with it? Why did the governor of this state decide to put $33 million more into vouchers in his budget proposal? Why did the governor put in his proposed budget another $30 million for charter school expansion? Now think about that. With all the corruption that has gone on, with all the low performance that's gone on in the charter world, why would the governor go ahead and say, well, we got to put more money into it? Why would the federal government put a lot of money into these choice programs? There was a report issued recently, in fact, the U.S. government issued some of the findings. The U.S. Department of Education issued some of the findings, which indicates that of the monies that have been used, have come from the federal government to support support charter schools, that many of these charters just didn't open. They got a lot of money, didn't open, or soon closed. Now, why, in view of the waste of resources and the problem of using the education of kids with some of these charters, why in the world would government continue to support? Why would Bill Gates Foundation, the Walton Foundation, the Eli Broad Foundation, and why would a lot of the hedge fund managers and a lot of the politicians, including the Democrats for Education Reform, Beaver, why would all these people be joined at the hip to continue to destroy public education?
Follow the money.
Why would that happen?
They want us to.
Campaign contributions.
It all has to do with money.
Ideological derangement.
It has to do with campaign contributions.
Yep.
You see, let me put you on the spot. Have you ever given as much as, like, say, $20,000 to any particular campaign? Now, let's suppose that teachers and school people, they just work to improve educational opportunities.
And use their own money.
And pay for a lot of things in the classroom, and don't have money to give to politicians. And so when a guy comes when David Brennan used to come into the legislature, who had given $6 million to the campaign contributions, and then here comes a teacher that might have given $100 or so, $200, you know, not a balance there. Well, that's kind of a little bit of information about this whole matter.
No question, Jen, none.
So I am just going to, I can start in the middle, I can stop. I can stop in the middle of a word. I can stop in the middle of it. So I'd be glad to just stop and do we have some time for questions here? Okay, well, let's just go. Okay, Sue is going to pass around a list for your email. If you want to sign up for an email to get a message, Michelle, are you on my list?
Yes, it is. He writes a daily email that updates you on the whole state of Ohio. It's amazing. Thank you, Bill. Amazing.
Actually, it's 2 a day. You're reading one of them. So if you would like to have that, okay, so Sue, you call on, you call on people, because
There's an official person assigned to the microphone.
oh, okay, all right, well, that's,
I'd like to ask about the failed charter schools which you were referring to. Were they under any legal obligation to pay back that money that they took? Because you're describing huge sums of money that they took from the state system, and they failed. Did they, or in some cases, I have been told they didn't even open. What happened with that money?
well, the question is, what happened to the money? Where a system failed, or a charter failed. Well, let me get just a little background on that. With regard to the online schools recently, now that the public, there's public view of what's happening there, the State Department of Education finally decided to start collecting back money. Now, ECOT owed $137 million, and before it closed, they got about, I don't know, 20 million back, okay? Now, there's a couple lawsuits that are against the ECOT school, the ECOT management program, and the ECOT owner. But probably that isn't going to go anyplace. Some school districts decided to intervene in those lawsuits, and really the court is probably going to shut them out. The reason the schools wanted to intervene was so that they would press the issue. Because you see, the people that are in office today have received a lot of money from the ECOT people. And so the chances of them really pursuing this are somewhat limited. Now, that's currently. Now, there are some online schools that are, they're still in operation, and the state is collecting some of the money back, okay? Now, back in 2006, 2007, Scripps Howard News Service did a survey. They did an investigation of, that's a long time ago. That's more than a decade ago. They did a survey, and they sent some investigative reporters in, and they stood at the door of some of these charter schools, and one here in the Cincinnati area, and they found that there were like 64%, in one case 64% of the kids weren't there, but they were getting full payment. Now, they surveyed this all across the state, and they found out this was kind of commonplace. So they put this report together called Ghost Schools. You can still Google that, Ghost Schools. And I talked to one of the reporters a couple years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago now, and that reporter said, we were sure that somebody was going to go to jail because we submitted this to the Attorney General. Now, here's a real life example of why, what's been going on here. Keith Richards, the superintendent of Newark, Newark they call it Newark School District. Newark School District, the ECOT, Electronic Classroom and Clark, was taking $500,000 from the district And the superintendent couldn't find any students that were getting any services from ECOT. Not a one. They didn't have computers. Hello? Electronic school? No computers?
Wi-Fi.
Nothing. He went to the State Department of Education. The State Department of Education said, well, you signed off on them. Yeah, but I signed off on them getting education, not, just losing out on education. Went to the Attorney General. The Attorney General said, Keith, let's just not raise this issue. Went to ECOT, and of course ECOT wasn't going to do anything, right? So this isn't just recent stuff. The public officials have been aware. In fact, the current Attorney General, former auditor, sent his people into various charter schools, and in one school they couldn't find a student. Even with a search warrant looking for them. Couldn't find a student, not one. But what did he do about it? Didn't do anything about it. The bottom line is the state has not been aggressive in shutting down these businesses. The state has not been aggressive in reclaiming the money. The state has not been aggressive in, holding those schools accountable. But yet, a couple of years ago, the state got $71 million from the federal government to expand charter schools. Now think about that. What a ripple. Good, horrible.
Here's something that needs to be said. I'm always going to mention the elephant in the living room. It's the Catholic school education and the voters that, now I am Catholic, so I am not bashing Catholicism, I'm bashing the power of the Catholic school education and the power behind it. There are very famous legislatures who are very famous Catholics, and I can remember thinking, well, we pay tuition and then they get tax, advantages, and they justify this by giving scholarships to poor children in the neighborhood. They give them scholarships, and I know many poor children who have gotten good education. But it's a Catholic education. They don't have to take religion if they don't want. But there's a huge, I know some that have opted out of religion at Purcell Marion. Anyway, so this needs to be talked about because there's huge power, and we're talking about power. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about power, and there is a huge amount of power in that. And my question to any Catholic who thinks that that's a good idea that I just described, this is my question, and it's a rhetorical question. Why would you not want someone else's child to have a fabulous education? Why wouldn't you?
Well, let me kind of give a perspective on this. Some of the greatest supporters of public education in my realm of experience, some of the greatest supporters of public education are of the Catholic faith.
I'm not talking about faith. I'm talking about power.
Okay, but I want to clarify that some of them are some of the greatest supporters of public education are of that persuasion. Now, this whole thing didn't start. This whole thing didn't start about trying to get public money for private schools just recently. 1840, New York City, big movement to get public money for private education. But remember, the bulk of this money is going not through vouchers, at this point in time, not through vouchers, but going directly to the charter movement. I mean, we've got, it's both, but the dominant portion of the money that's extracted from school districts for choice programs is going to the charter industry at the point in time. What about in the future? I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Depends on legislation, I guess.
Are you talking when charter schools, are the Catholic schools included in charter?
No.
Are Catholic
No,
schools
that-
included in charters?
The vouchers have to do with, the vouchers have to do with Catholics, private schools, Catholic, Lutheran, Evangelical Christian, Seventh-day Adventist, Muslim, all the groups. By definition, the charter schools can't have religious instruction. But they're getting the bulk of the choice money. The charters are getting the bulk of the choice money. So,
Doesn't this obsession with privatization at least go back to Ronald Reagan,
Yes.
who said that basically the state is the enemy? I remember Elizabeth Warren put together a great collection of statements going back to FDR and education. You have Reagan saying, I feel if people have talents, they should pay to develop them. Meaning, obviously, if you have talents, you must have the money to develop them because the state is not going to do it. You could even go back further to Lewis Powell's notorious memorandum in the early 70s saying that basically higher education, all forms of education, are part of what's the big threat to the free enterprise system.
well, let's go back further than that. Let's go back to Milton Friedman, back in the 50s, who had this idea that government was a problem, that education bureaucracy was a problem, and that we ought to have vouchers for every kid rather than a public system. He said we ought to have public funding, but the money needs to go to for a voucher rather than go to the system. Now, Betsy DeVos is always talking about don't fund the system, fund the child. Well, the problem with that is that, at least in Ohio, the problem with that kind of thinking is that Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution says that the General Assembly shall make such provisions by taxation or otherwise as will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools. You know, we don't pass out the highway transportation money to each individual and say build your own road. We don't pass out the park recreation money to each individual and you build your own backyard. You know, we do this collectively. Reagan was influenced greatly by the Milton Friedman philosophy, and come up with the government can't solve the problem because government is the problem.
Exactly.
And so you come along then in the 90s, we had Chubbs and Moe, authors of I've temporarily forgotten the name of their book, but they promoted the idea that schools can't solve the problem because schools are the problem. The public system can't solve the problem of education because the system is the problem. That was kind of a takeoff of Reagan's idea that government is the problem. You can't solve the problem because government is the problem. That sort of thing. They're here. Let me dispel a myth here. Many people have the idea that from the 50s this way, schools have deteriorated greatly. And the Nation at Risk report was based on bad analysis. The Nation at Risk report in 1983, that's Reagan's report on public education. Had they disaggregated the data, more poor kids were involved in testing and so forth. Had they disaggregated the data, they would have come to an entirely different conclusion. Now, the Sandia report, the Department of Energy did a report. They did a study that they thought that was going to confirm the nation risk report. But you know what? Those engineers at the Sandia laboratory, when they did the data analysis, they came to an entirely different conclusion. They disaggregated all the data, and they said, essentially, schools are doing, schools have problems, but they're not deteriorating. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Has a question.
Well, as soon as I finish here, the Walker Bush suppressed that report for political reasons. And so the bottom line here is that this whole school reform effort is based on myth. A myth that private schools are better, public schools are failing, and when you analyze the data, you find out that the public schools have an advantage over the private schools in terms of being able to teach and kids to learn. Are you telling me I'm done, or you have another question?
We need more time?
Yes.
Thank you for coming. I think education is one of the most important things we can do as a country, as a culture, and I'm concerned about the condition of our education. I also am a conspiracy theorist. I think if 1/10 of 1% of the population has all the power, they've got to be doing constant conspiracies. I think destruction of the public education system is one of those. So I think there are oligarchs who prefer that we be stupid and or ignorant so that we do things like elect Trump and they're winning. And they're winning, and they're really winning.
Well, let me expand on that just a little bit. House Bill 70, some of you know about House Bill 70. House Bill 70 was passed in a 24-hour period. House Bill 70 was created in the dark by a former state superintendent of schools and a former governor. And they concocted this crazy idea that if we could just govern Youngstown schools, we could make it greatly better. Well, the problem's not governance. The problem is poverty. And until you deal with the poverty issues, you deal with the education barriers that these kids face, I don't care what kind of government you have, but what House Bill 70, the bottom line of House Bill 70 is this. The people in Youngstown, or now Lorain, then East Cleveland, and then maybe Dayton, and then Columbus, Toledo, these people aren't smart enough to run the system. Therefore, we have to have somebody else running the system. Now, the state superintendent just appointed the chairman of the Academic Distress Commission, who hires a CEO that usurps, that has power, that has complete power that the boards used to have. He appointed a guy from Columbus to be the chairman of the Academic Distress Commission in Lorain. Now, how smart is that?
May I ask something? Look, this is our own fault. This is our fault. Because we didn't work hard enough to have a real Democratic Party. Not that it's always got all the answers, but get rid of that government. And we passed up the best chance we'd had in a long time this year. With Sherrod Brown running and with the blue wave running around the country to some extent, we lost out. And we had David Pepper speak here one time, but he wasn't asked any hard questions. We've got to have a real Democratic Party, or all these terrible abuses of all kinds will go on. They'll destroy public education. The Republicans will destroy it. And so, look, blame ourselves. We've got to work a lot harder than we have with a Democratic Party in this state, in my opinion anyway.
Well, I think we have to work with all the parties to deal with the issue. I mean, we've got Democrats running around here that are pushing charters just the same way the Republicans are pushing charters. Time was when all the parties were in favor of public education. And so, regardless of who's in power, you know, the Ohio Constitution says that all political power is inherent in the people. We don't believe that. If we believed it, we'd be on the phone with legislators about every day. We would be really, we would really be speaking out. We would be writing more letters to the editor. Well, we would be having more public meetings. We'd be going to the State House more often. We'd be sending emails to the State House if we really believed that all political power is inherent in the people, like the Constitution of Ohio says in the first article.
Yes, a little bit of my history and how you have impacted it. I began teaching in southeastern Ohio, like yourself, in what was arguably the poorest school district in Ohio. It was Frontier Local.
Washington County.
Washington County, correct. And a few years after I began teaching, I was selected to testify before a joint legislative committee which was examining the equal yield formula, which would have given districts throughout the state the same ability to raise money, whether they were rich or poor. Now that went, when I testified, actually, some of the legislators were shocked to find out that we didn't have any kind of central heating. We had a hand-fired coal furnace. And they were aghast, but nothing happened from that. From there, several years later, I moved to what was arguably one of the poorest urban school districts, Mount Healthy, right here in Cincinnati. And I will tell you that I have waited 25 years to tell you the impact you had on so many teachers and professionals that I worked with, because I taught 36 years in public schools. And so you have been a hero of mine for all that time, and I've never had the chance to meet you or hear you, and I just wanted to let you know how vital your work has been and how much it's appreciated.
Were you in Frontier Local in 1977?
I was. That was 2 years before they went on strike.
So Charlie Brown was the superintendent?
He was.
Okay, and Charlie brought a group of people from Frontier Local to the State House one night and testified before the Senate Education Committee. And that was in the 70s. They were wanting some more money for Frontier and didn't get it. I mean, you know, they listened politely. He mentioned the equal yield formula, a great formula developed by a group from Syracuse, New York. Legislature adopted it, the equal yield formula, but didn't fund it. If you don't fund it, you see that the problem in I was reading yesterday, the problem in 1870, the problem was underfunding, even though the state has a responsibility for a fair and efficient system. The problem in 1970, equal yield, underfunding. Underfunding killed the formula that you testified to support. The problem today, right now, at the State House, there's a group of people who have been working for 18 months on a funding plan, and chances are that they're going to hold it up They don't want to put the money in. Now, you know, are the citizens of Ohio just going to put up with this? Are the citizens of Ohio going to go after?
They won't be tuned in
I mean, the
enough.
bottom line is we
Yeah.
have to have more money.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm curious about the status of the divided schools. When my mother was starting to teach in the late 50s, she was teaching at Glendale School, and Glendale School was all white. And there was an additional school in the district or nearby, and it was all black. And that does not seem to comport with the idea of equality in funding and excellence that you refer to. So where does that fit in the history of public school?
Well, I assume you're talking about Cincinnati schools.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, well, you know, several districts were found guilty in the 70s and 80s, found guilty of segregation, and of course that was a social. That was as much of a social. That was so much a demographic, you know, where people live problem.
They all live together in Glendale.
Yeah, well, and there was in some, like Cincinnati was found guilty. Columbus was found guilty. Other districts were found guilty of intentional segregation. Yeah. And you know, that's where the busing came in, and then now the busing is kind of, you know, you know, you know, we could, I'd like to have time to discuss that whole issue, because I was at the State Department of Education when we were involved, and the Ohio Department of Education was sued, because the Ohio Department of Education, being responsible for helping develop a fair and efficient system under a State Board of Education, was guilty of not forcing compliance. So, you know, there were a lot of people. Oh, yeah, you know, it's a matter of, you know, housing patterns, it's a matter of intentional segregation, there's a matter of, at a local level, it's a matter of the state not monitoring. You know, just blame all over the landscape.
Can you mention the current state of House Bill 70?
Current state of House Bill 70, you know, the one that rips the power away from the Board of Education. There are at least 5 bills in the legislature, a couple of which would completely repeal the whole matter. Others would tweak it somewhat. We just need to repeal it. Just get rid of it. It's bad policy. Ripping the power from the local people is wrong. Just need to get rid of it. Call the governor. Call the state, the Speaker of the House. Call the Senate President. Call your own legislators. Just say, repeal it. Get rid of it. It's a crime the way this thing was developed. Here we have a state superintendent under the cloak of darkness in going up the Mahoning Valley, meeting with some non-elected people to determine how Youngstown was going to be governed. And then he brought it back to Columbus. They got the thing ready, and in a period of 24 hours, without any public input, the legislature passed this despicable legislation. And we just need to get rid of it. You know, governance is not the problem. We need resources to help kids. And of course, Cincinnati School District has done a great job in terms of the wraparound services. We need more than wraparound services. We need all those services. We also need additional resources in the high poverty districts to provide lower class sizes, tutors, additional teachers, counselors, and so forth. You know, well, I think you're here for a reason.
House Bill 70.
Repeal House Bill 70.
Yeah.
I think we're going to relieve our speaker now, and if he's... I think you've outdone yourselves today, actually being interested in what's going on. I love it, I love it, I love it. Thank you for your interest, and if he's not smart enough to get out of here, you can ask him your own questions. Okay. He hasn't been accused of being smart, so. We have a great speaker next week. We're going to have Jill Schiller and talking about what we can do to help candidates in 2020. And the week after that, Bob Park for the Sierra Club. We have good things coming up. The schedule is around you and there are copies around. Take them home. Thank you for coming. You are a great, great audience. Thank you.